CBS News Texas exclusive. Today, this happened just hours ago. 2 simultaneous raids on jewelry stores. We got one in Irving, one in Frisco, and they were the culmination of a year-long investigation by the Collin County Sheriff's.
Mounds of cocaine and methamphetamine seized as part of an investigation busting an alleged drug smuggling ring. The drugs were seized earlier this year in California.
At 2:19 a.m., Miami police scanners crackled, a helicopter banked over Biscayne Bay, and 3 words ricocheted through encrypted federal channels: "Seal the shoreline now." In Coral Gables, where floodlit hedges hid one of South Florida's richest estates, a jewelry empire was about to split open from below. The target was Mateo Soria, a private jeweler with Palm Beach clients, Geneva buyers, and a reputation polished smoother than the stones he sold. By the time the first black convoy turned off Old Cutler Road, the FBI Miami field office, ICE Homeland Security Investigations, and the DOJ had already locked the night under one name, Operation Glass Meridian. What nobody on the perimeter understood yet was why the order included Port Miami before the estate gates had even opened. Soria's compound sat across 17 acres of manicured silence. A limestone fortress with 3 courtyards, 86 cameras, and 28 biometric locks tied into a custom security stack that had frustrated federal surveillance for 9 months. The public face looked immaculate. His galleries sponsored museum dinners in Miami, funded scholarship luncheons in Washington, D.C., and backed a polished nonprofit called the Auraline Cultural Exchange Foundation, which claimed to preserve Mediterranean craftsmanship through legal trade. That foundation had leased office space in Doral, donated to gala boards, and circulated brochures printed on thick cream stock that smelled faintly of cedar and money. Behind the paperwork, FinCEN analysts had traced 11 shell companies that bloomed and vanished between Florida, Delaware, and Panama faster than auditors could pin them down. One invoice said antique brooches. Another said loose sapphires. A third described industrial fasteners weighing far more than gemstones ever should. Less than 10 minutes after the first convoy staged, Miami-Dade Police Department units widened the outer cordon while U.S. Customs and Border Protection flagged container traffic linked to Soria's freight broker. The file that mattered most did not come from Customs. It came from a sealed affidavit in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of Florida, built around an accountant who had stopped sleeping after noticing that identical parcels appeared in ledgers at Miami, Hialeah, and Newark, but never entered legal customs inventory. He described a street code name whispered in internal chats between couriers and brokers, Velvet Row. It was not a road on any official map. It was the nickname for a service route that began beneath Soria's estate and ended somewhere nobody inside the task force could yet prove. At 2:26 a.m., tactical teams initiated entry from the East Motor Court, while a second stack cut power to the outer gatehouse. No glass shattered, no alarms screamed. The estate accepted the breach with the eerie calm of a place that had rehearsed disaster and grown arrogant from surviving it. Inside, imported marble stretched through galleries, lined with emerald necklaces, imperial-cut diamonds, and showcase crowns insured for sums large enough to finance small governments. The wealth was theatrical, but the architecture was stranger. Walls were too thick where they did not need to be. Floors echoed where solid concrete should have muted everything. And beneath a wine archive that listed 42 trays of inventory, an FBI structural specialist noticed a draft rising through stone that should have been dead still. That sealed level raised suspicion, nothing external. It came from inside. While ICE teams cleared the West Wing, Soria's private security chief stalled them with access denials, missing master codes, and a polished insistence that the vault corridor was protected by international insurance protocols. He lasted 34 seconds before federal warrants overruled him. The corridor opened onto a chamber no architect had filed with Coral Gables. Behind a brass tasting wall, hidden latches released a hydraulic panel, and the room beyond dropped into darkness wide enough for freight. At 2:41 a.m., helmet lamps cut across a descending concrete passage fitted with rail guides, ventilation fans, and electric carts strong enough to pull loaded cases through bedrock. It wasn't just a vault extension, it was deeper. The corridor ran south and west under private easements, storm drains, and utility lines. A 2.6-mile artery engineered with the precision of a military bunker and the vanity of a palace basement. There were fuel lockers, there were fiber repeaters, there were drainage pumps stamped with serial numbers scraped clean. And there, beside a steel workbench, sat the first artifact that changed the entire operation, a black calfskin ledger embossed with a gold sunburst and locked by a ruby clasp. Task Force analysts would later call it the Obsidian Ledger. That name spread fast because ordinary accounting books do not pair shipment codes with passport initials, safe house notations, and hand-marked arrows toward Port Miami berths. The first pages listed 37 false invoices. The later pages tied high-value stones to sanctioned gold, private couriers, and buyers shielded behind diplomatic hospitality events that had never been hospitality at all. Taped into the back cover was a micro-storage wafer containing account key 9047 and a rotation schedule for container 118. Suddenly, the estate was no longer the finish line, it was the junction box. By 03:08 hours, the operation had split across South Florida. In Doral, HSI agents hit a climate-controlled warehouse registered to the Auraline Foundation and found carving benches, custom seals, and shipping foam molded for objects far denser than jewelry display pieces. In Hialeah, another team forced entry into a polishing lab where raw stones were recut to erase origin markers before resale. At Port Miami, CBP inspectors froze outbound traffic on 2 flagged lanes, while U.S. Coast Guard patrol units tightened the water perimeter near Government Cut. Palm Beach lit up next. U.S. Marshals Service deputies executed a warrant at Soria's oceanfront penthouse and seized burner phones, guest manifests, and a wall safe holding 14 passports under 6 different surnames. The tunnel still held the worst secret. Midway through the subterranean run, federal teams found a transfer chamber reinforced by poured concrete and lined with freight racks numbered in grease pencil. Some held empty crates. Others carried bullion sleeves, antique settings, and velvet pouches heavy enough to bend the shelf mesh. One crate contained children's coloring books on top and unset diamonds below. Another held religious statuary with hollow cores. A third carried rare watch movements packed beside loose Colombian emeralds. What seemed like a luxury smuggling route turned into an underground logistics system built to rewrite origin, ownership, and value before any item reached a legitimate market. Outside the estate, dawn had not arrived, but the public temperature was already rising. Residents along Old Cutler Road filmed armored vehicles through hedges. Helicopter footage framed the mansion against police strobes and tidal black water. Cable anchors in New York and Atlanta improvised language before facts caught up, calling it a cartel raid, an anti-corruption strike, a sanctions case, a laundering empire. None of those labels captured the shape of the machine under the house, because the machine was not only physical. At 3:17 a.m., just as analysts in Miami began uploading tunnel imagery and ledger captures to federal evidence systems, command screens inside the mobile operations van flickered, froze, and went black. Chain of custody forms vanished mid-entry. Inventory tags reset. A mirrored warning bloomed across one forensic terminal, then another, and then the network began replaying old traffic camera loops as if the raid had never happened. No outside breach. Internal CISA specialists in Washington, D.C. were patched in within minutes, pulling packet logs from a secure tunnel that should not have been touched. The malicious traffic had not come from overseas proxies, dark web relays, or a hostile embassy cluster. The trace pointed back to a maintenance credential activated from inside the task force bubble, then hopped through a backup uplink attached to a federal communications case near the estate perimeter. Somebody had not tried to stop the raid. Somebody had tried to blind the evidence after discovery. That narrowed the suspect list with brutal speed. Only a handful of personnel knew when the tunnel team would descend, when the ledger would be photographed, and when container 118 would be frozen at Port Miami. One of them was Daniel Reeve, a logistics liaison assigned to the joint operation through a contractor desk that serviced federal transport systems. He had sat through the timing brief, handled convoy sequencing, and kept his expression flat even after the Obsidian ledger was announced over the encrypted channel. And he also had debts nobody on the vetting review had fully surfaced. The trace deepened. CISA mapped the intrusion to a cloned token paired with a portable signal amplifier hidden in a spare medical case loaded into the secondary command van. Reeve had signed that equipment through at 1:54 a.m., then quietly repositioned it after the first breach element crossed the motor court. Before anyone reacted, he was gone. A perimeter camera caught him cutting away from the south wall toward a drainage easement that connected, with grim poetic symmetry, to the outer line of the same underground route federal teams were now cataloging. Reeve never reached it. FBI agents intercepted him beside a maintenance culvert less than 400 yards from the estate boundary, carrying a suppressed pistol, a flash drive, and a handwritten map marking only 3 things: the tunnel midpoint, container 118, and a marina slip on the Miami River. The betrayal cracked the remaining silence inside Soria's network. His chief of finance, cornered with the ledger excerpts and the failed wipe attempt, finally admitted the foundation was a front for routing illicit cargo through charitable exemptions, cultural loans, and private showcase events. The tunnel had moved jewels, gold, currency, forged provenance papers, and human couriers when air routes became too visible. The estate had never been merely a home. It was the polished lid on a buried economy. By 3:47 a.m., federal units were tracing the last branch of the subterranean run to a disguised loading bay near the riverfront. Where trucks registered to a hospitality supplier had been cycling sealed crates into ordinary city traffic for years. The route touched Miami without ever asking permission from Miami. That detail outraged the city more than the money. At sunrise, the DOJ confirmed coordinated seizures in Coral Gables, Doral, Hialeah, Palm Beach, and Port Miami. The FBI held the estate. ICE processed foreign movement records. CBP locked outbound cargo tied to Soria's broker web. FinCEN began the slower bloodletting through accounts, trusts, and nominee partnerships. Television crews kept focusing on the chandeliers. Investigators kept staring at the floor, because beneath the chandeliers was the real monument, a passage built on wealth, concealment, and the assumption that prestige would always outrun scrutiny. Soria was escorted out just after daylight in a dark suit that looked untouched by the dust below him. The cameras caught his face. They did not catch the final image investigators carried away from the tunnel wall. Children's height marks penciled beside freight codes, proof that the route had served not only contraband, but fear. That discovery changed the tone in every briefing that followed. It stopped being a story about luxury. It became a story about access, immunity, and the thin line between protection and purchase. If a nation can be hollowed out beneath its finest walls, if trust can be sold by someone inside the perimeter, if power can travel underground while the public watches the chandeliers, then what remains standing when the foundations finally speak?